In this video, we're going to take a look at multiplying decimals numbers together. So before you try this video, you should be able to multiply whole numbers and multiply fractions together. Okay, my first question for you here is, what is 0.3 times 0.3? And lots of people give us the answer and they say, well, that must be 0.9. And I'm going to tell you that is the incorrect answer. Why, you might ask? Well, I'm going to show you why. Let's think about what we've learned in fractions so far. So we know that 0.3 is the number 3/10. So I'm going to write it as a fraction 3/10. So if I multiply 3/10 times 3/10, I know my answer has to be 3 times 3 gives me 9 as a numerator, and 10 times 10 gives me 100 in the denominator. So that gives me 9/100ths. Well, 9/100ths as a decimal is actually 0.09, so I need 9 in the hundredths column. So that means that the answer to 0.3 times 0.3 is 0.09. Okay, now I'm going to give you an easy way to remember how to do this if you don't want to convert to fractions all the time, and that is to say that count the number of decimal places in your question. So this is the question part, and this is of course the answer. So in my question altogether I have one decimal place here and one decimal place here, so I've got 2 decimal places in the question. And so that means I must also have 2 decimal places in the answer. So the amount of decimal places in the question must be the same as the number of decimal places in the answer. Okay, let's look at another example. Here I've got, what is 0.5 times 0.5? So if I use my sort of trick from before, I know that 5 times 5 is 25, but I need 2 numbers in, 2 decimal places. I've got 1 decimal place here and 1 decimal place here, so my answer will have to be 0.25. Okay, so I've got 2 decimal places in the answer. Another way you can look at, or you can think about this, is if we draw a picture. Now take a look at this square here. I'm going to pretend this square has a side length of 1. So that side length is 1 and that side length is 1. And I know to find the area of a square, I need to multiply the 2 sides together. So length times width, 1 times 1 gives me an area of 1. Now let's say I cut this square in half this way and in half this way. So up to that red line there, I've got 0.5 and 0.5, or a half. Now if I just wanted to find the area of this small square that I'm outlining, I would have to do 0.5. So the area of the small red square is 0.5 times 0.5. And you can see if I'm just taking the area of that, what I've got is a quarter of the original square. So the area is a quarter, or 0.25, because those are equivalent. Okay, so that's just a way to think about multiplying decimals using a picture. Alright, so now let's take a look at how we would do this without converting to fractions or without drawing a picture. The first one is 14.6 times 9. Now if you know how to do this already, please feel free to stop the video and try these questions and then skip forward to the answers to see if you've got them right. If you need a little bit of help, just follow along here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the decimals. So the first thing I'm going to do is ignore the decimals and just pretend I've got 146 times 9. Okay, so it's just some nice normal whole number multiplication. Multiply these together, so 9 times 6 is 54, 9 times 4 is 36, plus 5 is 41, and 9 times 1 is 9, plus 4 is 13. So I get 1,314. Now, I have, those are the digits that are going to be in our answer. But because I've got 1 decimal place in the question, I need to have 1 decimal place in the answer. So my actual answer is 131.4. Now, what you should do to also check that you've got the right answer is you should round your numbers. Okay, so you can round 14 to 15 times 9. Okay, or even, to make it easier, 15 times 10. 15 times 10 is 150. Okay, so that means 15 times 9 must be 135. So we can see that 135, that's pretty close to our answer. So we've got the right answer there. So to check your answer, estimate, round your numbers and estimate and check. Okay, example number 2. I've got 4.36 times 0.3. So again, I'm just going to ignore all those decimals and make this 436 times 3. Okay, quickly do the multiplication, and I get the digits 1308. Now I need to work out where the decimal goes. So in my question I have 1, 2, 3 decimal places in the question, so I need 1, 2, 3 decimal places in the answer. So my decimal is going to go there, 1.308. Again, I can round to estimate this. So I can make this 4 times. Now, if I round that to 0, I'm just going to get 4 times 0 is 0, and that's not that helpful. But I can say 4 times 0.5, because I know 0.5 is a half, so that just means I'm taking half of 4, which is 2. And 2, that's pretty close to 1.308, so I know from my estimation that I've got the right answer. Last question is 0.9 squared. So what you'll have to recognize here is that means 0.9 times 0.9. Okay, so let's do multiplication of whole numbers. 9 times 9 is 81. I've got 2 decimal places in my question, so I need 2 decimal places in my answer. 1, 2. My decimal is going to go here. And just to make it neat, I'll put a 0 in. 0.81 is my answer. Okay, next thing we have to do is be able to find the square root of decimals. So you'll notice in that last question there, we got 0.9 times 0.9 is equal to 0.81. Okay, or 0.9 squared is equal to 0.81. So then I know if I'm going backwards, 0.81, the square root of that has to be 0.9. Okay, so let's take a look. In 0.64, I have 2 decimal places, the 6 and the 4. So that means when I take the square root of it, my answer is going to have half as many, so I'll write that down, half as many decimal places. So think of this as a whole number first. The square root of 64, that gives us 8. Okay, and because I've got 2 decimal places in my question, I'm going to take half of that. I need 1 decimal place in my answer. So my answer is 0.8. And we can check that we're right by squaring 0.8. 0.8 squared is 0.8 times 0.8, which is in fact 0.64. Okay, so we can check by going backwards. Let's try a second example. So I've got the square root of 0.0144. So let's just look at those digits there and take the square root of 144, which is 12. Okay, now in this one I have 4 decimal places in the question, so I need half as many decimal places in my answer, so I need 2 decimal places in my answer. So instead of 12, I'm going to have 0.12. And we can check again. 0.12 squared is equal to 0.12 times 0.12. 12 times 12 is 144. I need 4 decimal places, so I'm going to have to add in a 0 to give me that 4th decimal place. And there I go. And that is correct, because that's what I started with over here. Okay. We're going to look at multiplying by multiples of 10. So multiples of 10 are any number that end in a 0. And the way we're going to do this is, if I have this one, 5.1 times 700, I'm going to break 700 up into 7 and 100. So I'm going to think about this as 5.1 times 7 times 100. Okay, so there, that was my 700. Okay? So 5.1 times 7, let me just do a bit of working out on the side here. I'm just going to think about it as 51 times 7. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 times 5 is 35. So 5.1 times 7 is 35.7. And then I need to times that by 100. That means that I move the decimal place twice. So I'm getting 100 times bigger. Gives me the number 3570. Okay, we'll try our second example. Oh, and sorry, I forgot, you can check this by rounding. So if you just did 5 times 700, you should get 3500, which looks pretty close to our answer, 3570. Okay, last question here. We've got 0.0465 times 12,000. So I'm going to make that a new calculation. I'm going to say that's 0.0465 times 12 times 1,000. Okay, and so I'll do my 0.0465 times 12 first. So let's just make that 465 times 12. And I'll do that quickly here. 2 times 5 is 10, 2 times 6 is 12, add 1 is 13, 2 times 4 is 8, add 1 is 9, put in my 0, 1 times 5 is 5, 1 times 6 is 6, 1 times 4 is 4, add my numbers together. Okay, I've got 5580. Now, let's take a look. I'm just going to write the digits down first. 5580. So that was this bit here. I need 4 decimal places, so my decimal is going to have to go here. Okay, so now I've got 0.5580 times 1,000. When something becomes 1,000 times bigger, I need to move the decimal place 1, 2, 3 times. So I get 558.0, or just 558 as my final answer. Okay, so don't forget, here's some steps for you to think about. First, ignore the decimal place and multiply as you have whole numbers. Then check your calculation by rounding. Count the number of decimal places in the question and make sure you have the same number of decimal places in the answer. And when you multiply by a multiple of 10, factorize the multiple to give a power of 10 and the other factor. So what I mean by that is if you had 700, the factors were 7 and 100, so we did 7 times 100. Okay, so multiply by the other factor first, and then by the power of 10. Okay, so that's the end of this video now. So we've done multiplying by decimals and multiplying by powers of 10.